Hey Indianapolis Motor Speedway fans, Doug Boles here with you for another episode of Behind the Bricks. We've been having a lot of fun telling stories about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but it is Founders Day. Founders Day is the day that we celebrate 113 years ago when the Indianapolis Motor Speedway became a corporation. Construction started, land acquisition started, and ultimately we had a balloon race, a motorcycle race, cars, bricks came here, and then in 1911 we got the first Indianapolis 500. But we thought because it was Founders Day, we might focus on one particular founder who was pretty important to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Karl Fisher. And one of the cool things about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is just all the records and history that we have that we can read and understand what was going on back in the day. And Karl Fisher wasn't just famous for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but Miami Beach, a whole lot of other things. And we've been able over the years to find more and more information that we don't even have here through people who love the Speedway. So Kurt Cavan, our good friend who knows as much about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and our racing as just about anybody, has helped me comb through a lot of those records of Karl Fisher. And we've sort of settled on 3 letters that we found through a friend of ours, Jonathan Hess, who helped us find some things that weren't in our collection. And we thought we'd take a couple of those on Founders Day to talk about that. But Kurt, thanks for joining me. Thanks for combing through a lot of letters and coming up with some pretty cool things.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it because, you know, when you get to a letter, you start to see the personalities a little clearer. Not just the information, but what, you know, maybe the tone they used, the, you know, just the instructions and the back and forth between key figures that we know so much about.
So let's start with one of those. We all obviously know the different eras. There was the Karl Fisher, James Allison era that got us up to Eddie Rickenbacker, and then obviously Eddie sold it to Tony Hallman. Ultimately, Roger Penske buys the Indianapolis Motor Speedway through those 4 eras. But I don't think people really know how much Karl Fisher influenced Eddie Rickenbacker to make that purchase. So Karl was our president here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway till June 10th of 1923, and then he stepped away. But from 23 until we sold Eddie Rickenbacker, it was really James Allison. But Karl Fisher was pretty involved through some of those letters, convincing Eddie Rickenbacker that he needed to buy the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, he understood that Rickenbacker had more of a racing background than he did. And honestly, there was a period in there, you mentioned him stepping back, but Karl and the owners of the Speedway, the 4 of them, had somewhat distanced themselves a little bit, not necessarily for a purpose. They just kind of drifted away a little bit, and Pop Myers was running the show, and I didn't realize Pop had been basically running the Speedway for 18 years, which is quite a period there that kind of goes a little bit unreported. But it's interesting how many just nuances as far as promotion. Karl was very good at promotion. Yeah, he was great at you know, things that would bring people in. He suggested Charles Lindbergh be you know, a pace setter, a celebrity to be part of Rickenbacker's first Indianapolis 500. And those are the types of things. He thought it would bring 25,000 people, for example, which I wish you had a magic bullet like that could bring 25,000 more people. But
you know, Karl Fisher was ultimately, at his core, a promoter. You know, he came up with this idea of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He came up with the idea of Miami Beach, and he just got so focused in promoting. So reading those letters, it was really interesting. So it wasn't just Lindbergh, but he talked about the importance of music and bands, and he didn't want just any bands. He wanted 1,500 band members to come to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway because he felt like that was something he could sell around, or that Eddie could sell around.
Well, and it was all about numbers too. He said in the letters, I don't want 1,329, I want 1,500, even if some of them can't even play a note. He wanted a round number that felt like a big deal, and he had certain expectations for him. He wanted more drum majors to lead the parade, if you will, because that would help keep the line straight, for example. I just thought that some of those nuances are very cool.
No, I thought it was really interesting, too, the way they communicated back and forth. And then ultimately, when Eddie Rickenbacker becomes president, we build a golf course here that now is this famous Pete Dye golf course that many people have had an opportunity to play. But if you go back in some of those communications with Eddie, Karl was suggesting that before. It wasn't Eddie's idea. Karl was saying, hey, you need to have a golf course here.
Because it was revenue during the time when the 500 wasn't being held. And he wanted a couple swimming pools as well, and club memberships for those privileges to play on the golf course and to swim in the pool to keep a steady revenue stream during the summer. I thought it was, you know, you think about, you know, just some of the ideas, but this was a practical way of keeping things going. By the way, you know, they send these messages back and forth. It's not like email.
You know, right, for sure.
I kept looking at the dates to see how long it took for one of them to respond.
And you know, they were always polite with each other. I'm in receipt of your letter from, you know, and then they would begin communicating.
That's not how you email me.
No, it's not how we email each other for sure anymore. But even, you look back in it, so the golf course was one thing, but Karl Fisher really thought a polo field would be a really great idea here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. In fact, the Speedway at one point in time actually owned some horses, and they were starting to try and figure out what different clubs that they could compete against, which I thought was really interesting, even in talking to Eddie about those.
Yeah, he was going to have 2 polo fields with an ability to go to 12, fit them in the infield, and they would have barns for up to 60 horses. They even had somebody picked out from Austin, Texas that would come up here and lead the program, and it would be the best team from Indianapolis against a team from Dayton. You figure why Dayton, and Dayton is one of our best areas for Indy 500 supporters and ticket buyers. So it's just interesting, some of those connections that 100 years later, they're still kind of the same things we're talking about. One of the other things I thought was brilliant, he said, we've got to get younger with the sport. We're talking about that today.
Yep.
You got to keep the old timers because they're built-in fan base, and they come, just keep them engaged. And so those are some of the things that we still do today.
It's funny you touch on that because even if you read Wilbur Shaw's autobiography, a lot of the things he talks about are just that. We've all had the same problems, and how do you manage through them? But it's just been a little, obviously different eras, and we've got different tools to do that, but it's really interesting. So another thing that I think is really interesting in those letters, recently we've talked an awful lot about a sports car race here, especially a long-distance sports car race. Roger's really interested in that, so are all of us. We've talked for several years about lighting the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but that's really been a conversation that's been going on for 100 years.
Yeah, 1921, as far back as the letters show, that they were talking about a 24-hour race, and they would do it in the infield. I don't know how much of the oval. He didn't get into those kind of specifics, whether the oval would be used, but as we know from some of the drawings, that there was an ability to do that. And but one of the things I thought was interesting, they really wanted it based on highway specifications. This would not be some elaborate sports car. All the letters that come with all the sports car groups today, wasn't any about that. It was about regular fuel, regular tires, regular cars.
So, you think about the start of the Indianapolis 500, it was really all about that. Karl Fisher said, I want an opportunity for all these manufacturers to come and showcase what you and I could go buy in the showroom. So I think that's a little bit of what probably even drove that 10 years after the 500 started, is he wanted to capture the revenue, the money, the advertising dollars that the OEMs were going to do, and I think maybe that's part of what drove that. But I loved how they didn't talk about lighting the Speedway, but I said, we're going to illuminate it, right? They're going to illuminate the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which I thought was an interesting use. We talked about lighting, they were going to illuminate it, which it seems more Karl Fisher-like, right? It seems bigger and more grander.
Next time that comes up in the conference room, would you say that to Roger? We are going to illuminate. So maybe, Roger be a little more, sign that check for illumination.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. There are a whole bunch of letters that we've had an opportunity to take a look at, a lot of different things that Karl's been involved with. So hopefully over the course of these Behind the Bricks, you and I can talk about some more of them. But one of the things that makes Founders Day so special, it is our history and our tradition that makes the Indianapolis Motor Speedway what it is. It's the 3.2 million bricks, it's the same racetrack, but it's all of these stories, the passion that the men and the women who have participated, the fans who come year after year that make it so special, but it's all on the backs of an idea that Karl Fisher had in 1909. And we are celebrating that day today, the start, Founders Day, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Kurt, thanks so much for spending some time with us. We'll look forward to seeing all of you again on Behind the Bricks. If you've missed these, got a whole ton of them, a lot of fun to watch, gives you a little bit of insight on some of the places you might not get to normally go here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And stay tuned for more. We are right around the corner from the 106th running of the Indianapolis 500 presented by Gamebridge, and we're going to have a lot of fun telling stories leading up to May 29th.